I am going to share my screen. Okay, you can all see that. So welcome everybody. I am Julie Roth. I am a senior energy something analyst at the Office of Sustainability and Innovations for the City of Ann Arbor. And I, amongst other things, run the Solarize program for the city. And I am so honored to help host the Ann Arbor Solar Stories with the GLREA. Today's speaker we're so excited about is Joe Trumpey. He's going to tell you all about himself, but he's above and beyond a solar story, that's for sure. He's a sustainability story all in one package. I think he said he hasn't used fossil fuels to power his home and farmstead since 12 years or something like that. So I can't wait to hear his story and see what kind of little tidbits of gems of ideas that I can glean from him. So you know that the GLREA and the Solar Stories are sponsored financially by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, as well as McNaught McKay Electric Company and Harvest Solar, and we thank them very much for their sponsorship. So you know, the GLREA has these Zoom programs on a regular basis. So the first Thursday of every month is this. It's an Ann Arbor Solar Story. This is more like a Grass Lake Solar Story, but we snuck him into Ann Arbor because he works here. So, you know, that's close enough. The second Thursday of every month is a clean energy seminar, which can be really fascinating, interesting topics of all sorts around clean energy. The third Thursday of each month are Detroit Solar Stories. And then the fourth Thursday of every month is either a Michigan solar story from somewhere else or an energy Q&A, where people can come and get all of their energy questions answered by people who like to be on Zooms answering energy questions, which is the GLREA. The Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association is celebrating its 30-year anniversary. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization formed in 1991, and it's supported by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy in the Great Lakes. And they do both of those in spades, educate and advocate. And so if you're interested in supporting the GLREA, there are ways that you can help them. You can become or renew your membership at GLREA. You can financially sponsor a membership for a local teacher or student who might be interested. You can help grow the membership by encouraging others, telling them about the GLREA, especially folks who are interested in solar or getting solar. And of course, you can just give them money because they'll take that too, as you know, most will. So I think that, yep, that's all I've got. I have the easy part. And so thank you for being here. It's really exciting to see all this interest. And Joe, I'm just going to hand it over to you. I think Joe's going to talk for about a half hour. Then there'll be a lot of time for questions.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to be with you all tonight. Hope everyone's doing well and being healthy. I am in Ann Arbor right now at my faculty office on North Campus, illuminated by grid-powered fossil fuel energy, unfortunately, and we'll touch on that. So I am an associate professor of design and environment and sustainability at U of M. This is my 28th year here. I have appointments, my primary appointments at the School of Art and Design, also in the program in the environment, and I direct a living learning group for first-year undergrads called the Sustainable Living Experience that's at Oxford Houses near the Arb here in town. So a lot of different things going on. One of my main courses I teach for program in the environment is green building, and I had my first class today, even though I think I had 5 students out with COVID and 6 others in quarantine. So it's a rough start to the semester. But one of the things we talked about is in the US, buildings count for a lot of energy use. Over 3/4 of all electrical use in the US goes to buildings, and 40% of total energy use. So efficiency, building size, building appropriateness is really important, especially when we live in a cold environment where we spend more than 90% of our time inside of buildings. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Certainly, it's a big, complicated report, but in a nutshell, this is what motivates a lot of my work in terms of thinking about reducing carbon footprints. We know that if we're going to cap a 1.5 degrees Celsius change and get to that net zero goal in 2050, which is, this sweet spot in this chart on the right-hand side. And believe it or not, these are out of the IPCC report, these are the charts that are sent out to the general public. So a real problem here on how we communicate about climate science, because not very many folks in the general public are going to spend the time to digest charts like this. But the important, in a nutshell here, is this sweet spot of hitting carbon neutrality in 2050. And you can see right about there is the year 2030, when we need to reduce our footprints by 50%. So if we take something, not thinking about transportation or other things, if we just look at buildings, and we're using 75% of our electricity in buildings, how are we going to cut that in half in the next 8 years is a real challenge. So, I lifted this chart from a permaculture book. And one of the reasons I like it is because they use the term creative descent. So how we use interdisciplinarity and creativity to be able to minimize our footprint is really important and key to a lot of my work. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I grew up in Indiana. I was a Boy Scout on the heels of the first Earth Day. A lot of my Eagle Scout project was cleaning up garbage at the Indianapolis Museum of Art and planting trees. So we would call it ecological reconstruction these days. But that's the Hoosier National Forest that I used to spend my weekends at. Lived in the city. And as we went down to the Hoosier National Forest, we literally passed the power plant. So it became a pretty jarring experience for me as a kid to start to see and understand these differences. And like I say, on the heels of that first Earth Day, with acid rain and rivers catching on fire and crying Indians and Carter putting up solar panels, we began to see and understand pathways towards action. So I've always been an action-oriented, goal-driven person, and living off the grid became an early goal once we started farming. Neither my wife or I grew up on farms, but we've been farming for more than 30 years now, and or just about 30 years now. And building our own homestead that was energy savvy was a goal. If you've not seen this New York Times article, I suggest you Google it up. It's just New York Times, where does your energy come from? And they have these great charts about fuel sources for every state in the union plus US averages. So here's the Michigan power grid as of 2017. It's improved a little bit. What's on here that you can't really see is a tiny little yellow stripe down there that doesn't even really isn't visible in this chart. And that is solar power, solar PV. So you can see our grid is still quite dirty in Michigan, which is one of the motivations. It is the motivation for us to be off the grid. So I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but DTE is U of M's energy partner. And I'm sure many of you have dug in and know that DTE is not a very clean power source. Consumers is a little bit better and a little bit friendlier on things, but not great. Here's a logo I share with my students. It's the Board of Water and Light from Lansing. And we, as graphic designers, will tease this apart and be like, hey, what does this literally mean? And if we were taking it at face value, it would say, hey, 1/3 of our power is solar, 1/3 of our power is wind, and 1/3 of our business is building grid infrastructure. We could give them a lot of room and say that's aspirational. But if we were truthful, we would say that that is a lie. So the grid is not as clean as they would want to say. This is a chart that I use a lot in my teaching too, from Lawrence Livermore. Understanding quads. I don't understand a quad. I got a C- in physics in college. I like it though because it's volumetric and we can kind of see and understand things. They've been putting these charts out since I think 2009. So you can kind of see changes over time. We've seen that coal piece get much smaller. We've seen the solar piece get a little bit bigger. I think it's really interesting for us to see where that electricity is going, the rejected energy, what happens when we electrify our transportation fleet, where's all that electricity going to come from? But certainly, as aspirational as we are about solar, it's still a small but growing piece to the puzzle. So in terms of visualization and trying to see and understand things, this is a great visualization from NASA looking at atmospheric carbon. I think it's a really huge contrast and motivation between contemporary environmental problems versus early Earth Day environmental problems when things were dirty, and it wasn't hard to build consensus over, hey, rivers are catching on fire, good or bad. Everybody would say, yeah, that's bad, we need to fix that. But now we're dealing with, carbon in the atmosphere that we can't see, we can't taste, we can't smell it. It doesn't affect our senses. It's complicated to talk about 350 parts per million versus 424 where we are today. So it's communication problems. So that's what I work with a lot of my students. So just to give you a little bit of context, here's something from energy.gov about trying to help us understand energy use in Michigan. Average US Michigan citizen here says 143 million BTUs. I've seen numbers bigger than that. I don't know how close that is. Trying to make it into burritos and sticks of dynamite and piles of coal, kind of helpful, but I don't know many of us who have context with 400 sticks of dynamite a day in terms of energy use. So things to think about. Certainly thinking about this thing and understanding how ecological systems work, thinking about how we can design buildings and lifestyles that work off of solar is kind of my sweet spot for thinking and design. So we certainly use solar to do passive heating of our home, to do solar thermal to heat our water in the summertime, to certainly do solar PV to make our electricity. So we're off the grid. So most of the year we're using 100% solar PV. We do have some gaps that I'll mention, and certainly thinking about photosynthesis to grow food. We live on a farm. So to grow our food, to grow pasture for livestock, and certainly to grow forest for wood, that biomass that we burn to avoid burning those fossil fuels. So one of the design constraints in designing our farmstead was looking at low energy local materials. So I spent about 5-6 years doing the work on the design work. Wayne is here. Hi, Wayne. He's a great solar or straw bale designer that I got to know later in the game. I wish I would have known Wayne earlier in the game. But using local low energy materials and trying to get as efficient as possible. So straw bale became a good answer for us and for using reclaimed ash timber on the heels of the ash borer infestation in Michigan. So here's our home, designed, like I said, by me and my family, really constructed by me and my family over the period of 2 years. It's about 2,200 square feet, the home itself. So trying to hit a sweet spot that's under the US average, but still in conversation with averages. You can see that we're facing south. We're protecting our west and north, really trying to get a lot of solar gain with that southern exposure and really protecting the natural clay plasters on the north and west sides of the building. In this shot over here in the right, you can see our solar PV array that's out in our pasture. We've got it mounted on a dual axis tracker up about 25 feet in the air. So it's a 4 kilowatt array. When we first put it up in 2007, it was a 3 kilowatt array. I'll share more about what the panels are, and we can in Q&A get into some of the nitty-gritty details. I never quite know how much technical stuff to get lost on. Clearly, we're not members of the tiny house movement. It's a great movement for a lot of folks. We've had as many as 8 humans living in the house with us, foster kids, graduate students, my family. We have 6 or 7 dogs all the time. This would be a recipe for disaster, living in a tiny house with that much going on in Michigan. So great for some, good for some places, good solution to minimize your footprint, but not going to work in a lot of other contexts. We're not preppers. We're not doomsteaders. I definitely get a lot of inquiries from folks and a lot of the same motivation and same overlap. It's interesting conversations, but really our motivation is about sustainability, good, sustainable local food, thinking about energy systems, thinking about the dirtiness of the grid and alternatives of what we can do to behave differently than the grid. So the building design is really thinking about efficiency, but it's also thinking about the behavior. So summer kitchens, access to gardens, access to pastures, access to where wintertime manures concentrate, where we can use that as compost in our gardens and growing. We are growing about 50 to 60% of our food any given year. The house is designed with this big stem wall, big eaves, trying to protect the straw and the natural plasters from driving rains, backsplash rains. Here you can see drifting snow, which is less of a problem, but still part of the protection there. So there's my work crew. My kids, Autumn and Evelyn, are both college age kids now, and my wife Shelley is a third grade teacher in Pinckney, but that was in the thick of it. And one of the cooler things that happened out of the project was Mother Earth News named us Homesteaders of the Year in 2015, which was pretty fun. I'll show you a few shots of the interior. These shots are probably, I guess, late October, early November. So you can see sun streaming in through the windows for that passive solar kind of greenhouse effect temperature rise that we want, and natural light in the late seasons, shoulder seasons, but not in the summertime. The timber frame carries the second story and roof loads. Like I mentioned, it's all reclaimed ash, mostly out of the city of Jackson. So built a relationship with the city forester in Jackson. Some of the cherries, some of the bigger ash trees, the taller ash trees came off of our property. This wood burning cook stove is functional. It's not an antique. It's a contemporary stove from a manufacturer in Canada. We use that to top off some of our heat that will convect up to our second floor. We have no heating embedded in our second floor. We do radiant floor heat that's wood fired on our first floor, but we'll use the wood burner for seasonal cooking and heat. Around the corner from there is a fireplace that also tops off some of our heat. There you can get a sense for the thickness and kind of the beauty of the big, thick, curved walls, which really drew us into the aesthetic of the straw bale. So there's our library, our second story. So like I said, there's an open loft here around our chimney, which is acting as a thermal chimney to convect some of our heat to the second story. The master bedroom. We have a summer kitchen outside. My wife is a really avid canner, putting up 600 to 800 jars of food a year. So keeping that cooking and heat outside the house, being able to have a wood-fired oven to do some baking. We also have a small, we call it our easy bake oven. It's an electric oven that we'll use in the summertime, but not in the winter. So we're behaviorally adapting according to the season. We'll cook with the electricity using a small convection cooktop and electric griddles, crock pots, as much as electricity as we can in the summertime. And then we wean ourselves off of that as the seasons change and start to move over to wood in the wintertime. Here's my sawmill. I estimate I've milled well over 150,000 board feet of timber between this project and other projects. So there you can kind of see some in progress of the house going up. It's a 5-bent 4-bay frame for anybody that's into timber frames. That center post is it's a 28-foot long post. So I milled all that timber on site, really trying to minimize and shorten the stories about the life cycle analysis of where those materials came from. All the field stone is from our fields on the farm. The straw came from a wheat field from a neighbor right across the street. Like I said, all the ash came from the city of Jackson. So we really estimate the bulk of all the heavy materials came within about 10 miles of the house. This is how we'd mix up our earth and plaster in about 800 to 1,000 pound batches in kiddie pools. We estimate 80 tons of plaster on our building. That's a lot of the work. One of the things that makes straw bale buildings efficient is that they break thermal bridging. So here's a thermal scan of a conventional stick frame building, and you can see the bridging with 2x4s or 2x6 walls. And in the lower right, you can see the bridging only happening around windows, which we can circle back to if people are interested. I definitely designed the place to have no weird exotic technology. We didn't want to do any DC lighting or propane fridges or freezers. We use conventional appliances that we can get from Lowe's. They are from Lowe's, or most of them are from Lowe's. But we have a dishwasher, a flat screen TV. I have 2 freezers, a standard fridge, So pretty normal stuff. That said, this is the one piece of kind of exotic equipment. This is a wood gasifying boiler that is Austrian made. The Europeans are ahead of us, ahead of the Americans in terms of boiler technology. This is an indoor boiler. It can approach the efficiencies of a fossil fuel device and really requires us to burn a lot less wood. So we use this to do our radiant floor heating as well as our domestic hot water. So it's through this device that we're able to say, hey, for the last 12 winters, we've not burned any fossil fuel to heat the house, heat our domestic hot water, or do our cooking. This is also a good lesson for, I think, tales of living off the grid. We try to normalize it as much as possible to make it feel like it's accessible to a broader audience. So hence we're designing the house to be in that range of an American average house. It looks kind of average. I mean, most of the people that come, one of my favorite parts of the year is the solar home tour. And the most common remarks that we get is, gee, I know where I'm coming when the zombies hit. I said we're not doomsteaders, but I guess, we'd have a flood of people. And number two is a lot of people try in a nice way to say, like, I was expecting your house to be really a crummy, like ugly mud hut with, just crude, but actually it's kind of nice and I could live here. So, that kind of offhanded remark of being able to say, like, hey, there's a way to do natural building and do things that are pushing an edge of thinking about efficiency and carbon footprints can be beautiful and accessible. So back to tales of life off the grid. Some of it is normal. We don't have to worry about things, but turning on lights are pretty efficient, but we certainly were conditioned to turn off lights when we're not in a room. When our kids were little and would visit somebody and spend the night, they'd come home and we'd say, how was it? And they were like, oh, it was good, but boy, you should have seen how many lights they left on. So, behaviorally, my family's conditioned to pay attention to what we're doing. And certainly I'm monitoring our electricity every day. And certainly we are conditioned in the wintertime to understand our hot water. So back to the story of this wood boiler, I fire this thing once a day. I typically light it about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it will run for 4 to 6 hours, depending on the wood, depending on what's going on. And at that point, we've charged all of the floors in the house with hot water, and that radiant heat will carry us over to the next morning. But then we also only have a 40-gallon tank of hot water to live with for the day. So behaviorally, the family comes home when kids were still at home. They come home from school, and part of our family behavior would be, hey, who needs a shower tonight? Because once you start to use the hot water is gonna run out. So, behaviorally, this is understanding that natural resources can run out. That tank of hot water is limited. Once we start using the 40 gallons, we have to use it in succession or it's gone. So if 4 people want showers, you got to take them 1, 2, 3, 4. If 2 people take it and wait an hour, they're going to have a cold shower. If the first person takes a long shower, the 4th person is going to have a cold shower. So it's, part of our family norm to be able to negotiate and understand. If it's a gray day and we don't have much solar electricity, you don't use the microwave. You don't run a load of laundry. You wait for the sun to shine. So that's, I guess that's some of the story here of life off the grid, is paying attention to what is a limited pot of resources, whether it's a tank of hot water or the amount of charge in your batteries. This is a recent photograph from just this week. So that's my wood pile in my boiler room. And that pile will get us through the rest of the winter without issue. So it depends on the winter, of course, but we're typically going through anywhere between 15 and 19 face cords of wood, hardwood, to do our domestic hot water, our space heating, and our cooking for a 2,200 square foot house, plus my workshop, which is pretty good. All right, here's our solar array out in our field. We have it up really high to avoid any early day shadows and late day shadows. It's a dual axis tracker, so it tracks the sun during the day. It's a dumb tracker, meaning that it doesn't know its latitude and longitude. It has to have enough sun in the daylight. It's a Watson tracker, if you're familiar with Watsons, out of New Mexico. At the very top of this panel, you can see a little box up there, and it has 3 photo sensors on it, and it's just running a little algorithm all day saying, hey, how bright are you? How bright are you? And as long as all 3 are the same, it's not going to move. If one is darker than the other, it says, hey, I'm in shadow and I need to move your direction. So the thing will move and follow the sun during the day, adding anywhere between 40 and 60% efficiency to our system. In 2007, when I bought these panels, they are sun power panels, 21% efficient panels. I paid close to $5.50 a watt for those panels. These days, you can find 20% efficient panels for $1.10 a watt, to give you an idea of how much the price has come down. You can also see there's a difference in the first 3 kilowatts we put up were 250 watt panels, and then these 3 on the side are 350 watt panels, and we got a deal on those a couple of years later to fill out that array to be 4 kilowatts. So it's not a very big array. I get a lot of questions about, would you do the tracker, not do the tracker? The tracker is about $6,000. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't put the tracker up 25 feet, probably put it up 15 feet or 20 feet, just because of maintenance. Can be a pain, and I only had to maintain it a couple of times. But I like the idea that those panels are working really efficiently, and that gives more panels to the system for other people to do solar too. The other great thing about it is in the wintertime, this is probably a mid-October day. In the wintertime, those panels are quite vertical, and they will shed snow, or if it's a sticky, icy snow that sticks to them, it will melt pretty quickly. So that was definitely one of the design factors. I had designed part of my building above my shop to have good roof surface for up to about 40 panels. But once I started to investigate the tracker and said, boy, we could do 12 panels instead of 30 panels, and I don't have to worry about brushing snow off on a winter day. Cool, I'm in. And it's worked out pretty well. This is our storage system. We use golf cart batteries. So a golf cart battery is 6 volts, lead acid, 2 strings of 30. So 6 times 30 is 180. So we run a high voltage system. Our resting voltage when the batteries are full after dark is 180 volts. In the daytime, while this is charging, and many of you know that cool panels work better than hot panels. So another advantage of having those panels with a lot of air circulation up in the air in the middle of the pasture, we get a little bit more efficiency out of them. But a cold January day in full sun actually makes more power than a full sunny day in August, believe it or not. We have it set up. I've got just a simple computer monitor that tells me the status of what the voltage is in the system at any point, and how many amp hours we've drawn out of the system, and how many amps are either going into the system or coming out of the system. We don't have good Wi-Fi. That's one of the reasons why I'm here at school talking to you, because it's stable internet, not great internet at home. So I don't use any smart devices to track or do anything. It's all old school. I write stuff down. I go in and push a button a couple of times a day to understand where our voltage is and what we can and can't do. These lead acid batteries are about $110 a piece. We're on our second set. The first set lasted us 9 years. This second set, we worked with, this is a photo of the first set, which were largely Energizer batteries. The second set is from Crown Battery down in Fremont, Ohio. And we worked with the engineers there to lower the specific gravity of the effluent in there. And those engineers think that we could get maybe 12 years out of this battery set, which is pretty darn good. Compare them to, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes because I bet there's some folks in the group that have Tesla power walls. I like the fact that lead acid batteries are right at the top of the list of #1 recycled items in North America. 99.x% of lead acid batteries are recycled. No rare earth minerals in them. And the price is good. I mean, $120 per battery. And you're looking at $7,500, $7,800 worth of batteries there. What's a power wall is, I think, $8,500. And if you look at total storage in those lead acids, I've got at least 3, maybe 3.5 Tesla units of storage. So lots more cost efficient. Maintenance is part of what I have to do. I have to definitely top these off with water 2 to 3 times a year. So they aren't maintenance free, that's for sure. So it is possible to run heavy machinery. This is my workshop. I've got a 15-inch planer that's a 5 horsepower motor. That table saw is a 3.5 horsepower motor. I've had to learn how to cheat the system because those motors are designed to be grid tied. So I cheat by I've got 2 switches set up on everything. So I've got a 110 switch and a 220 switch. So I turn it on half power to absorb a soft surge. And then once the motor's up to speed, I'll turn off the 110 and punch it up to 220. But I certainly wouldn't use my workshop on a cloudy winter day like today. I would wait and use it on a nice sunny day. So again, behaviorally. Here's some over the past 10 years of pretty good tracking. The first few years I wasn't so great at tracking, but it's pretty easy round numbers. Over 10 years, we've averaged 10 kilowatt hours a day over the calendar year. In the summer, we can go as high as 22, 25 kilowatt hours. Again, we kind of cheat where I place my freezers. I've got a freezer that sits outside on our summer kitchen and one in our garage. They work less hard in the wintertime when we don't have a lot of power. They work like hell in the summertime, but I don't care because I've got lots of power. So, you find where you can pinch and pull on things. In the wintertime, if the house is empty during the day, if it's not winter break, we can go as low as 4 kilowatt hours a day, which is pretty bare minimum. That's just running the boiler and keeping the fridge on, and not using the microwave, not doing laundry, waiting for sunny days. If we do run out of power, our fossil fuel footprint for the house right now is a small 4,000 watt generator. It's like a $350 generator from Harbor Freight. And I'll put 2 gallons of gas in it and charge the batteries, and that'll let us tread water for a day. And, depending on when the next sun comes out, I might burn, I think the best winter we ever had was, I think I burned 26 gallons of gas. The worst winter we've had, I think I burned like 85 or 86 gallons of gas. So far this year, I think I've burned 40 plus gallons of gas to keep the batteries charged. So that is our one fossil fuel footprint. Put up more panels. Well, it doesn't really help if it's not sunny. Could put up a wind generator, but you got to have a tall tower. It's complicated. So trying to find that sweet spot. Paying attention is definitely the key. Like I said, I'm monitoring our use on a daily basis. My monitoring has become a little bit more casual these days as I'm familiar with the system. When we had 8 humans living at the house and high schoolers, I was monitoring a little bit closer. Now that we're empty nesters, I can pretty well predict what we're going to go through in a night, what we're going to go through in a day, using things like a kilowatt meter to understand your energy intensive appliances. I do have a power meter like this set up at my house. It has nothing to do with the grid, but it's a good way for me to track our total kilowatt hour usage. So I'll cruise through a few pictures of the farm here and a couple of things at U of M, and we'll go through this pretty quickly, and I'll move us into Q&A. We have a big flock of sheep. We've been farming these Jacob sheep, which we started 30 some years ago. They were considered endangered. We're into rare genetics and heritage stock. So we do a lot of wool, still some good woolen mills in Frankenmuth. We're just about ready to start lambing. So cool sheep. We used to do cattle. We're down to 1 Highland cow. My wife and I met in Scotland, so we have a soft spot for Highlands, but we've kind of given them up, partly because we weren't eating beef. We're not vegetarians, but we're only eating meat probably twice a week at most. So we certainly haven't purchased any meat. We've not purchased commercial meat or eggs in pushing 30 years. This is a critically endangered species of American pig called a mulefoot pig. And we keep around 10 or 12 of these guys. It's a lard pig. This is an American chinchilla rabbit, also endangered, that we do. It's a meat rabbit. I hunt our property as well, piles of deer. My wife has her summers off and is addicted to her garden and keeps a beautiful garden, beautiful veggie photos, amazing canning, and we really do eat out of our garden. So like I said, we're producing 50 to 60% of our food on any average year. We do open up the house the first weekend of October for the solar home tour. It's been COVID canceled. Hopefully we'll be open again this year. If not, John was asking me if we could do a virtual tour, and I'd love to do that for us this year. We'll see. Here at U of M, I teach some green building courses and design build courses. So here's a couple of quick projects I thought I'd show you. This is a small straw bale building that is up at the biostation. U of M has a 10,000 acre property up in Pellston, which is like 18 miles from the bridge. So they're working on becoming carbon neutral up there. I don't know exactly what that means for them, but they're trying. So this was a stepping stone into there. So this was the first faculty designed, student built, majority women crew built, first off-grid building in U of M's history, which was pretty cool. I designed it that we could build it in a month. We broke ground on May 2nd, and that's a picture from May 28th. There's the crew that built it in that month, which was pretty cool. Here's a little 1 kilowatt off-grid system, just enough to do computer projector, charge phones, charge computers. This is what that system looks like. You know, simple golf cart batteries again, a simple midnight charge controller, and a really simple inverter. Does the trick. Nothing fancy, but it gets it done. So a few shots of students doing the same gig, learning how to use tools. Most of these students have never had experience with circular saws or tools, and learning how to work as a team and thinking about sustainability and energy is pretty cool. This is the straw bale building at the campus farm that's at the Botanical Gardens. So earlier on, I was talking about how campus farm has been around now for 12, 14 years. They were lacking kind of a landing spot, kind of a heart or a home for the farm. So landing spot for classes, for activities, things to happen, you know, a place of the earth made out of agricultural waste materials, again, off grid, a little bit bigger, earth and floor in this one. Timbers milled from campus trees. So kind of interesting, good stories. It's pretty amazing to see students using the sawmill. I mean, conceptually, we all know that lumber comes from trees, but once they have the tactile ability to like actually saw a board out of a tree, they're just so bloody excited. I mean, they're like literally applauding each other. Like, look, we made a board. It's like, cool, you did make a board. And it came from campus. So this building also is in tight partnership with University of Michigan Dining is one of our main partners. So we host farm to table events there, and it's pretty cool that all those lights are solar powered and off grid. So it's a sweet little story, concise little story about local culture, local energy, local materials, local food. You know, it all ties it together to a nice teaching moment. This is our project for the summer. We're building this pavilion to have an outdoor kitchen space there. Some of the indigenous communities of Michigan are using the straw bale for seed saving workshops through seeds that have been repatriated to them. And this will also be part of infrastructure that they can use for their potlucks. So this is the kingdom I'm trying to build, people. I've got 1,000 square feet at U of M out of 37 million square feet of buildings. So, you know, we're getting there. It's at 0.00003%, but like work to do. So there's our house last week, and I think that'll give us plenty of time to have some Q&A. I'm happy we can go back and look at more images. We can talk technical details. Yeah, wherever we want to go.
Wow. Holy cow. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to suggest maybe stop screen sharing so we can see people and raise hands and things like that. That might be, that was humbling and astounding. And I'm really struck, especially by how behaviorally, how aware you are of everything that you do and what it means and the finiteness of resources. I had two quick questions. I'll leave it to everybody else. But one was, I just want to clarify, when you talked about your straw bale construction and you showed how it doesn't have the thermal bridging, I was struck by that because I assumed there would still be thermal bridging because there were still 2x4, 4x whatever. So I'm curious about how you avoid the thermal bridging. And second, did you ever consider geothermal? And if not, why not?
Sure. You know, bridging is energy moving across solids instead of dead air spaces. So a straw bale is 18 inches wide of basically dead air space. The straw itself is the chaff. It's the waste product of the grain, the grass that was grown to make the seeds. So you've got this big compressed block of dead air. So there's unlikely any single pieces of straw that are moving that full width of 18 inches. So really you only have the natural earth plasters, which is about 1.5 to 2 inches of plaster inside and out that are isolated from each other. So there's nothing conducting energy across that gap to those solid plasters like a 2x4 or a 2x6. In that image, you saw bridging around the windows. So there is a little bit of lumber around the windows and around the doors. And that is the small amount of bridging that you'll get. The geothermal question, we did put in, when we put in our foundation, we did what's called a rubble trench foundation to minimize our concrete footprint. And in the bottom of that, I did put in a loop, and we did contemplate a closed loop geothermal system. But the goal of being off grid and understanding that when we need our geothermal is when the days are short and we don't have much solar power. So that's one of the reasons why I run my boiler at full throttle to get the heat out of that load of wood and into the water and into the solids of the floor as quickly as possible so that I'm not using electricity to run pumps all day. The heat would be a little bit more even if I burned the boiler a little bit slower and ran an even temperature of water through the floor. But I have it set up that I make it as hot as I can, get that heat transferred as quickly as I can so I can turn off those pumps so I save electricity.
Great. I'm gonna let you just call on people.
Yeah, sure, right on.
And so people, like Ben here, you can raise your virtual hand with the reactions button. If you don't know how to do that or it's not working, you can just come off camera or on camera and raise your hand or unmute yourself. And I will try to watch the chat too and pipe in with some of those questions.
Yeah, right on. Ben.
Yes. Oh, this is fantastic. I took a strawbale course decades ago, and the city, well, I won't say anything, but had challenged getting acceptance in Kalamazoo. So I'm overjoyed you're doing this. I wish I could take your class.
Yeah.
But I've already built my tiny house, and looking at the total size of your tiny house, 2,200 and 10 people, that comes out to 220 square foot per person. Well, that's tiny house living of a sort.
Sorry.
Had you considered, or is it possible theoretically, do you think, to combine straw bale building with passive house design?
Oh, for sure. I think that wouldn't be an issue at all. And there are folks working on that, kind of trying to standardize prefab panels and, really making some innovative straw panels. Here in the Midwest, we're working with two string bales. Out west, they have 3 string bales. There are ways to, continually improve the way that you insulate using those straw bales for sure. And your point about Kalamazoo is well taken. I mean, we live in Grass Lake, we live in Jackson County. We're 2 miles into Jackson County, very much on purpose because of the building inspectors. As I was planning, this was before, I think life got a little bit easier on straw bale builders in 2015 because it became part of universal building code. But prior to 2015, you really had to build relationships with your building inspectors. And in conversations, I was unable to find anyone in Washtenaw that would be that easy to work with. And Grass Lake was excited about having a straw bale. So it became a landing place for us. Kate.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for your talk. Very, very interesting. What did you call on the solar panel, the thing that makes it turn?
Well, it's a dual axis tracker. So if you've been to North Campus here in Ann Arbor, across from the VA, there's a little solar currents installation, and there's maybe a dozen trackers, and it's exactly the same tracker that we have. They're just short to the ground. So you can kind of sneak in there and walk up underneath there and see. It's a remnant of satellite trackers when the huge satellite dishes were out, how they would use machinery to track satellite dishes. This solar company in New Mexico basically adapted that tech to make these solar trackers. And like I said, there's smart trackers and dumb trackers. A smart tracker would know exactly your latitude and longitude and know, hey, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 5th and the sun should be right there. And I'm gonna point to that no matter what. Ours, it needs enough sun for there to be a shadow for it to move. And on winter days, one of the risks we run, at the end of the day, it tracks back to the east and waits for morning sun. If the sun moves through the sky and the sun doesn't come out until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's too far past for the solar tracker to go like, hey, I'll move to it. So those last few hours of sunlight we can miss. So and with our panels up so high too, I've got a different mode for it. I got a manual mode. So like yesterday when we had 50-mile-an-hour winds, I'll go out the night before and put it in manual mode. And instead of having it vertical, I'll flatten it. So we've never had a problem, but it is a big sail up in the air and could catch some wind.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to jump in with there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch in the chat. So I'm going to just go through some of them and then we'll jump back up to the people with their hands raised. There's one from Dale Klein that wants to know a little bit more about your electrical system, inverters and charge controller.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a custom made inverter. It's an 8-kilowatt inverter and a kind of a custom made charge controller as well with a big mercury contact switch in it. So when I was planning the house, I'm not an architect, by the way. I had built furniture. I'm a maker for sure. So I read books about straw bale. I read books about timber frame. That was all pretty logical to me. I read a book about designing an off-grid solar system, and I was like, I kind of get it, but like I said, I got a C- in college physics. And I thought, oh, I'll read a second book. I read a second book and was like, oh crap, that book was completely different than the first book. And then I read a third book, which was completely different than the other two books. And I was like, oh my God, I need to find somebody. And this was kind of pre-easy Googling of anyone. So through a couple of connections, we donated a conservation easement on our property. It was the Washtenaw Land Trust. We like to brag that we were the first non-Washtenaw donation, and they had to change their name to Legacy because of us. So that was cool. But one of their landowners had a solar system, and I talked to her, and she knew this guy who'd been designing off-grid systems since the late 70s and lives over by Grand Rapids. And his name is Chad Lampkin, an electrical engineer, really eccentric, but knows his stuff. So he helped me design the system and even do tricky things like, so being off the grid, once our batteries are full, our batteries are full. So we can't sell power back to the grid. It's a different philosophy than being a grid tied system of using the grid for storage. So once our voltage hits 212 volts, this mercury contactor switch comes on and turns off the power coming in. Solar panels are still making electricity. So we've spent a couple of years thinking about like, well, what can we do once the batteries are almost full to start using some of that surplus? So we've installed a 70-gallon electric hot water heater, which isn't very efficient. But once our voltage hits 205 volts, the solar hot water heater turns on and will stay on until it hits 212 and then shuts off. So we're trying to use that surplus summer power as best we can. But it's a pretty simple system. I mean, like I said, it's basically tracking current in and current out and amps coming in and amps coming out and total amp hours used.
That's great.
We work our batteries very lightly. We never discharge our batteries more than 50%. And that's how we got 9 years out of that first set, hoping for maybe 11 or 12 out of this set.
I'm going to go 2 back to back because they're both probably short, and then I'll let you go to the next hand raised. But the first is, how often do you have to re-plaster? And the second one is a great question. I think from Brandy says, now that your children are older, are they carrying on with this lifestyle on their own?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer the plaster question first. I designed the place. So like you saw on those U of M buildings, it had that big wraparound porch all the way around the building. And that is very much on purpose because it's not a monitored building. I don't go look at it often. So we really wanted to protect it from rain and snow. So that plaster should stay intact indefinitely, short of people like pounding it off or something weird. On my building, the north side is super protected, nowhere over 12 years at all. The east side has a little bit of wear and probably could use a new coat. The south side has a little bit of wear. I never, in the flurry of building the house, the intention was to get a full third coat on. I only got 2 coats on that side and it was doing fine. So I'm due to put a coat on that south side in the next year or 2 because it does get some wear. It's more exposed to let us get some more light and sun in through those winter windows. Our kids, you know, one lived in an apartment and one lives in the dorm. And, you know, one of the things she talks about, I mean, she is taking a shower every day, and she's in, like, you know, like, she can take a shower at home every day too, people, don't get alarmed. But she's like, I don't even have to think about it. Like, you know, I just go and I take a shower, and it's like, the water's always hot. So, you know, and it's fossil fuels. I know, Dad, it's fossil fuels, but it's like, you know, it's always there. And, you know, that's one of the lessons that, you know, I talk to my green building students about, is like, well, where's your electricity coming from? Where does your garbage go? You know, just these ecological history types of questions. And some things like our electricity and hot water, we expect them to be on all the time. So understanding how should they be limited? Should they be limited? How do we limit them? Where do we limit them? How do we get that 50% reduction in 8 years? It's all tough questions. Abraham.
How do you construct your roof? What are the layers of your roof?
Mm-hmm. We considered doing SIP panels, which are structurally insulated panels, which is an OSB sandwiched foam insulation. It was the first big timber frame I built, and I know that those SIP panels have to align really well for them to work well, and they're expensive. So we did some conventional stick framing on our roof. So there's 2x12s that I extended with another 2x6, and then 2x6 purlins on top of that, and then the metal right on that. And then we did a soy-based foam, spray foam right up underneath the metal for 2 inches to break that barrier. And then it's dense packed cellulose the rest of that roof. So it's a pretty well insulated roof. I wouldn't say it's a super insulated roof, but it's pushing an R50 roof.
Right. And I think right now there are 4 more questions in the chat. So at least get through those. One is, does U of M have a link designated for a middle school Project Lead the Way course of study? I don't know if you're familiar with Project Lead the Way. It's an Ann Arbor Public Schools has this kind of a engineering project-based program that's called Project Lead the Way.
Never heard of it.
Okay. Sounds like an opportunity, Lee.
Yeah. Sounds cool.
And Clyde says, have you begun to consider hempcrete construction?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a consideration for sure. You know, we talked about growing a crop of hemp at the botanical gardens. It's definitely still a big paperwork trail to get hemp legally grown. We might get there eventually. I mean, I've seen some workshops on it, hempcrete blocks and the like. I think it has great potential. Wayne probably has some ideas of projects. You know, in our natural plasters that we do, it's a mix of clay soil, mason sand. The soil where we are, we're on a sandy loam site. Our property actually was a gravel mine for when they built 94. So we've got a bunch of really interesting topography. We're on 40 acres. So it was hard to find a clay deposit on our property. So I had to up our clay content with some bagged art clay. Just because I'm at the art school, I was able to experiment with red art clay that comes out of a mine in Ohio, which also helps us get that red color. And then a lot of chopped straw. But if I had access to chopped hemp, I could have used chopped hemp in that mix instead of chopped straw. But I no doubt we will be seeing now, with weed being legalized in Michigan and the hemp crops are coming along, we will no doubt see hemp showing up in the natural building circuits for sure, especially if lumber prices, I mean, lumber prices have come down, but as people are looking for building alternatives, hemp will start to be a part of that mix for sure.
I love that image of everyone with their hands in there. That was very.
It's the biggest part of the work. I mean, people are excited to see the straw bales go up, and that goes up really quickly.
Yeah.
The hard part of the project is mixing all that plaster by hand and applying that.
I bet. Okay, Lee asks, is there a thermoelectric wood stove that will provide electric and heat in the winter?
Nothing to scale. I've experimented with some thermopiles. The thermopile is the little device that's changing that heat into electricity. I know that there's some research still going on with those, but to my best knowledge right now, it's only a few volts. I've not seen any large scaled systems. So, some of those companies that are selling fire pits and camp stoves, it's only making a couple of volts, just enough to charge a phone, basically. So to kind of create the kind of voltage that you need something that's a lot heftier than that at this point. Wood
Right.
gas is definitely, converting a generator to run on wood gas. And I attempted it. There's a whole wood gas culture out there of folks that run their vehicles on wood gas. People run generators on wood gas. I'm just not that mechanical. So, there are folks who like to tinker and, understand engines in ways that I didn't even like to fix my bike as a kid. I was more like with the wood and the hammer and the nails guy. So messing around with engines is just not my jam. So at this point, I kind of, wince as I fill up my generator with some gas. But, certainly I'm burning gas and part of a gasoline culture driving around in cars and buses too.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to get to the last question here, but also, does it occur to you or bother you, or how do you conceptualize the particulate matter? And I know it's not wood is not a fossil fuel. It's a resource that will turn to carbon all by itself.
Right.
But burning it does release particulate matter. Do you have a comment about that? Do you think about that?
Sure. This wood gasifier is fantastic about its emissions. It is incinerating every last bit, and the emissions on it, I don't remember the numbers, but it's well beyond EPA standards.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, for sure, we have some particulate emissions from that cook stove that we use, but the bulk of our heating is from that gasifier, and that gasifier is it's amazing to me. I only clean that boiler out every 2 to 3 weeks, and that represents, and it's a tin can that's about this big of wood ash, and that represents maybe 3 face cords of wood being incinerated, and it's not blowing stuff out the chimney at all. It's incinerating everything.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And then let's see, Janine and Dale say, it sounds like your system requires a lot of personal attention. If you aren't home for a period of time, is there an automatic mode? Or if you were out of commission for a while, would your wife or someone else be able to keep everything running?
Yeah, the family understands the system, and we have farm sitters who understand the system. It's not complicated, but it does require attention. So, it requires paying attention. It requires, in the summertime, it's easy. In the summertime, we're in surplus power and you can do whatever you want, and it's got a lot of residual capacity. It's this time of year that if, a farm sitter decided to run their laundry all day, they would be out of power.
Yep. Cool. And 2 more that kind of just came in. One from Janice, piggybacking on my original question. Did you use bamboo or steel rods to support the straw bales, or was it just wood?
Well, there's only wood around the doors and windows. There's window bucks and door bucks. Part of our building, my garage and workshop area and that boiler room, is actually load-bearing straw bale walls. And there is some inch and a half bamboo that's cross-tied across those walls to give a little bit of support. So, like I mentioned, my building inspector was really amicable about the whole straw bale thing. And as I got to know him, I started to push my luck with him. And as he was out one day, I was like, hey, Tom, what do you think about if we turn this garage, instead of a post and beam building, into a load-bearing building? And he didn't say yes right away. He thought about it and he said, I think I would need an engineer to stamp that, but I would say yes if you got a stamp. And I said, cool, do you know anybody who would stamp it? He gave me the name of the engineer that he worked with. And honest to God, I called that guy the afternoon. The next morning, he was at my place at 7:30. He drew up and stamped a drawing that next day and did it for free because he thought it was an interesting project. So we were able to get load bearing across that building, and it's every 6 feet. There is 2 pieces of bamboo. So all of that roof load is really resting on those straw bales, and we've had no cracking, no settling in
So
12 months.
that answers my original question about thermal bridging, because I assumed there was going to be framing and then the straw bales went inside just like insulation, but no, that's not the case.
It's not the
That's
case.
fascinating. And there's one more question here. I think we'll make this the last question so we can let Joe go on about the rest of his evening, but it's from Jill. And it says, how resilient is the home to things like high winds, flooding, and other climate related concerns compared to the average home?
I don't know how I'd like to test that. You know, we designed it so it sits up on a high point on our property, so I'm not concerned about flooding at all. We have that 3-foot stem wall that's around the whole building that really protects our, you know, more fragile straw from moisture. Moisture is the enemy of any house, you know, stick framed, conventional, or straw bale or hempcrete or whatever it is. It's a very quiet house, you know, with 2 feet of insulation. You don't hear any winds really. You don't hear much going on. The kids can be across the way in the garage practicing their trumpet and you don't hear it. So the insulation definitely makes it feel very solid. It's a very heavy house. They are very fire resistant too, by the way. Some really interesting photographs out of straw bale buildings with all the fires in California. You know, I'll show my design build class. There were some hybrid homes that were partly stick built conventional home and partly straw bale built. And the house is a pile of ashes except for the straw bale walls.
Mm.
The straw is you're under tremendous fire risk while you're in construction. So while we were building, we were really, really conscientious about raking up the straw at the end of the day, making sure anybody who came, like before you come in, no smoking, no gas powered equipment. You know, most of the fires you see is during the construction phase, because if, you know, somebody dropped a cigarette butt, you know, the thing would go up in an instant. But once it's got 2 inches of earth encasing the whole thing, it's very fire resistant for sure. The Canadian government's done a lot of work on fire testing, and the fire safety exceeds conventional stick framed houses.
Well, on that, I'm blown away, and now I'm definitely determined to come to one of your open houses post COVID or something, because that's just fascinating. I'm humbled and amazed and somewhat envious. And
You all out.
yeah, all those animals too. Oh, thank you, Joe, so much for
pleasure.
coming and taking the time to do this. I know that everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. I can tell. I know I did. And this is recorded. So for those of you who know people who might like to hear Joe's story, GLREA has a YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find it there within a couple of days, I'm sure. And then you can share it and spread the love. So
Thank you all for being here.
thank you. Thank you, Joe.